Well, it's Wednesday night.
How's it going,
And
everybody?
yeah, we got John Wilburn in here for Professor P, who's on vacation for the weekend. Oh, for
Professor
the
P is
Wednesday night.
indisposed.
Yeah.
I'm happy to see
Um,
everybody, though.
yeah, well, it's good to have you here, John. Thanks for stepping up.
Yeah.
Let's see. We'll run down the list, see who's here. Lars from, essentially JB and Lars. So the half the duo. John Wilburn, Miss One-Eyed Cat, Roger Logan, Fabrice Mod Repeat from Hello from Northeast Dragway, Clint's Street Machines, Buff Del Campo, Dakota's Timeout, Danny Boyd, Miss Catgy, Blue Grit Garage. Let's see, Keith Calitri
From Rhode Island.
from Rhode Island Boys. Let's see, Bruce Kultgen and Dave Norman and Buick Smith just made it in the door. Hello all. So it's another illustrious Wednesday night Tech Talk Live. I do have and Kim just jumped in the door here, so me too.
And
Yeah.
if you guys haven't yet seen it, Buick Smith put out a cool video of his motorized bicycle. And he's riding around, cruises through a college campus with it. It's a neat video. I shared it on my community tab, but go over to Buick Smith and check it out. It's pretty neat.
Well,
It's a board track racer tribute.
Well, he's trying to make it to the No Name Nationals, isn't he? So
I don't know. He's not registered yet, but he's got cool content.
Well, he started making content, and I was assuming that he was trying to get into the Buick to the No Name Nationals. So
that'd be great.
Yeah, Buick on the brain. Okay. And Danny Boyd says he's warning us he had beans for dinner.
You're in Cincinnati, Danny Boyd. I'm good.
Go ahead. Turn it loose. All right. Well, we haven't had any tech questions in here yet. Everybody's just greeting one another, but it's good to have everyone in here on a Wednesday night. And it's about to unfold. We're going to have some questions, I'm sure.
Oh, hey, Dallas. So you'll note in there that SSR Performance just popped in. That's Big James of the James and James Show.
Oh, all right.
He has rebranded the channel as SSR Performance, and he just put out a really cool video of taking a customer's car to the track and bracket racing with it. And it's good stuff. Check it out if you get a chance.
Yeah. Well, if you don't remember James and James, they were the Hail Mary victory from the 2022 No Name Nationals. Literally started 2 or 3 weeks before the event and knocked it out of the park. So let's see. Danny Boyd saying, what's better, spray cans from the paint place or an airbrush for painting a car pickup?
So my thought on it is you can do good work with spray cans. Paint Society has some great videos on using spray cans to paint a car. There's an art to it, and they paint it, they clear it. It looks great. You can do it. If you're talking about something really small, like a model, you need an airbrush because otherwise you're going to get orange peel that's a foot deep looking on something that small.
Well, considering the droplet's like 1/3 of the vehicle.
Right.
I just I've never had any luck painting anything with a airbrush or a paint can. I literally just go right to the air gun, so the paint gun. So that's the best luck I've had so far. But I imagine you could probably do it with an airbrush. It would probably take forever. But
yeah, it'd be smooth.
Yeah, so SSR Performance is what the James and James Show used to be.
Yes.
So, Miss Catgy's asking, who's into Cleveland's? Well, I have some Cleveland parts on a Windsor, but I would have to say if there's anyone bigger into Cleveland than myself, it would have to be Fabrice Mod Repeat.
And Andy Wood, he's a Cleveland guy all the way.
Yeah, he likes horsepower. So
I like the Cleveland. If for a Ford, I'm not a Ford guy, but I do like the Cleveland.
Well, it was finally a well thought out piece, right? I mean, it literally changed the game because when Cleveland came out, man, they ran amok in just about every class of racing, and then ended up carrying more weight per cubic inch than anyone else. and it really was just a canted valve, big port head, essentially big block Chevrolet head on a small block Ford. So,
So I'm not a Ford guy, but so I look at things kind of, you might think goofy. Ford had all this thing where they were adverse to engineering, right? And so
mhm.
they would swing the pendulum here and there wildly, and occasionally they'd have a really good combination, but maybe it was even by accident, And then they'd swing the pendulum over here and they come up with another really good combination. It just seems like that's kind of what the Ford guys deal with. Of course, that's just my perspective as an outsider, but the Cleveland was one of those where all the stuff just came together for a really good piece.
Well, the way I look at Ford was, like in the heyday of, I guess it'd be motorsports. You had the one-upmanship that happened just about on a daily routine, and Ford was notorious for one and a half upmanship, and that was the thing is like it really either went way overboard. Like when the Hemi came out, it wasn't even long after that it was the Cammer, and it's like, all
Mhm.
right, we didn't just set the mark high, we one and a half upped it.
Yep.
So, but yeah, they did that quite often in motorsports, and I think a lot of that comes from their heritage in Le Mans racing. So, who knows? I don't know. They spent a lot of money and time and research and development on a lot of that stuff. And then unfortunately, the camera just never really took off. It was only, once NASCAR kind of put the kibosh on it, and then it never came in a vehicle that really hurt them. But Roger Logan saying more info on offset crankshaft rod journals. It looks like a 340 bore plus 125 cubic inch stroke, or 125 thousandths of stroke offset of 35 thousandths. Okay.
Are we 340 Chrysler or 340 Buick?
Anyway, I'm sure this is 340 Chrysler.
Okay.
Nobody hot rods a 340 Buick. Even the Buick guys like take those out and throw them away and put a 350 in or something.
What's the question, Roger?
That's what I'm kind of trying to figure out. It looks like it's a maybe 125 overbore 340 block with a stroke offset of 35 thousandths. And so, what is a small block Dodge? 331 stroke.
Well, yeah, 340 is 331 stroke, and a 340 bore is 4.04.
So it'd be essentially a 3.4 inch or a 3.5 inch stroke then.
3.31.
Right, it's 3.31, but then you had 35 thousandths, right?
Well,
So 3.31 would be 3.125.
he's saying 125 though.
I'm thinking
He's
it's
saying Buick
125
questions.
thousandths bore.
He says Buick questions no Mopar.
Oh, whoa, all right.
So that changes everything.
Yeah, that does change
But
everything.
what are you asking though?
Oh, let's see. Where did you see his second comment at? Okay. Any extra edge small block Buick might gain over 350s Leavenworth, Kansas Skyhawk. Oh, all right. Okay. Well, if I'm being put on the spot here, Buick stuff, 340 and 350 I learned a while ago. It's difficult to make power with, just because there's so many disadvantages to it. Like the really tall deck height really hurts them. Um, uh, the neat things that it gains from the really tall deck height is the runner length gets longer, because the dang thing is 10 and a quarter inch deck height. But adding stroke to the 350 or 340, I think is counterproductive of what you're trying to do. I really think that they have too long of a stroke to begin with. If you offset grind them and de-stroke them, you're probably going to be something a little bit happier with the rod to stroke ratio. And that's what I've been playing with 300s is that I'm trying to get the rod to stroke ratio something similar to what they used to have in like Grumpy Jenkins used to say, if the closer you can get to 2-to-1 rod to stroke ratio, the better it's going to be. And I found that with Jack the Giant Killer when I did the 300, I came up with a 1.92-to-1 rod to stroke ratio. And that thing was so snappy and so zippy. It loved to rev. And unfortunately, the 340 and 350 have just such a huge stroke in them that the rod to stroke ratio is it's abysmal. If you look at it, they don't like to rev, and unfortunately, I mean, that's really what those engines were kind of meant to do. The 350 head much more than the 340 head. The 340 head only has 164 CFM on the intake side. It only flows 164 CFM on the intake side, and it would. The neat thing about it was it would meet peak torque like idle plus 1 RPM. So, but
So
now the bore, they will handle a pretty damn big bore. I've found that the 340 blocks, probably if they're anything like the 300, which I believe is just the deck height difference, you can take them almost out to 1860 bore. You can probably take it out to 1875 and put some 283 pistons in it. But
he's asking Roger's asking how you got to that 358 cubic inches.
For my combination,
Apparently,
for my super stock Buick, okay, that's a offset ground crank for a 350 Buick. So I did exactly what I was telling you not to do, because at the time it was just a learning process, and I'm going to run it anyway just because I got a ton of money in it and lots of time. But it's an offset ground crank. I went to used a NASCAR style rod where it went to an Acura bearing journal, so a 188 or 185 bearing journal, and then offset ground it. And then I used a 163 rod, which was made for that Acura bearing size, and a 6.3 inch long Chevrolet rod. And then I went to a 265 Chevy piston that was 125 over. So it's a 30 over 350 Buick block. And so in your case, it would be about 80 over from that 340. But you'd come up with the same combination. And if you could throw the TA heads on there with the that are made for the Rover, but I think the problem you're going to end up having is you're going to find that you're going to need like 35 plus cc dish just so you have 13-to-1 compression, because the chamber on that head's only like 37 cc. So
I'll combine a question that Buff had a while back at 708. What's the advantage to using a Windsor block with the Cleveland heads versus all Cleveland parts?
Well, the advantage was the Cleveland, kind of like some of the other stuff from that era. They didn't oil well. They had problems with oiling, and I wouldn't know if it would be really problems with oiling. You got to remember, Cleveland, if you got a 4-barrel Cleveland from the factory, they were capable of revving up to like probably 6,800, 7,000 RPM, and most stuff was like 5,500. So they just had problems oiling at that high RPM level, and they would smoke bearings and stuff like that. And what you did find was the Windsors didn't have that problem at all. They didn't really have an oiling issue. No, the harder you spun them, the better they were. And so you just really, what I did was I looked at it like I was at a crux where I had to buy an aftermarket block. If I wanted to keep running a small block Ford, I had to buy an aftermarket block. And I was looking one day, and World Products made they made a block called the Man of War, I think is what they called it, or a small block Ford. It was actually a 302 based engine. And I was looking at the price, and it's like $2,500 or $2,600 at the time. And then I'm like, you know what? If I got to spend the money on a block, I mean, what can I get for that kind of cash? So I started looking around, and lo and behold, 351 Windsor aftermarket block was about $100 more. And you could make them out to 440 something cubic inch if you wanted. You could actually, I think, take them out to 460 cubes. So it just, to me, was a no-brainer. The money was better spent. If I'm buying an aftermarket block, just like I'm going to buy an aftermarket crank, I'm going to get most bang for the buck. I didn't see any sense in doing a Man of War block. I wasn't class racing, so.
And SSR performances, deck height, and Cleveland mains were huge. The 400, the modified stuff, was even worse.
Well, the Cleveland mains are actually small. They're 2 3/4 inch. It's in between a Windsor main I'm sorry, a 302 Windsor main and a 351 Windsor main, which is a 3-inch main. The 351 Windsor had big mains, and then you get to the modified, which literally is measured in linear feet for mains.
A
Yeah,
Windsor has a 3-inch main in it.
what's a Windsor has a 3-inch main.
That's
Yeah,
the same as a big block Ford, isn't it? Like a 460.
yeah, yep.
Even a big block Chrysler is either 2 3/4 or 2 5/8.
Well, okay. So this is something I realized a while ago. All of that number from the factory is based upon stroke, right? So it depends how much stroke they were going to throw at it. So 460, if you're
Overlap.
looking at 460, they got a humongous bore and a really short stroke. And when you get a really short stroke, you all right, it was all around bearing speed and what they needed in the engine, right? So the shorter the stroke that you have, the smaller the main bearing that you can create because it has more overlap on the rod and the crank journal, giving strength to the crank. Now, if you have a really strong block, you can make it really small diameter main bearing and have the minimal amount of overlap. And that is the big block Ford. It has real small mains compared to the rest of the big blocks, like big block Buick's 3 1/4, big block Olds 3 1/2, big block Pontiac's 3 1/4. Or well, actually 455 Pontiac is 3 1/4, but and I think 400 is as well. But Pontiac used to have a short stroke engine, which was like their 389, 421. It was all made up with bore, and those things. That's actually what caused Smokey Unit to leave Pontiac in the early 60s is where they went to that large main bearing, and he was like, you're giving up so much, leave the stroke off the table and keep running with the small main because the bearing speed is what makes it up. And your rod to stroke ratios are more comparable. And so they went with that, and Smokey Unique left and went to Chevrolet. So let's see. I'm probably losing myself in all these now. Let's see. Mopars, Mustangs, and minivans. Bigger rockers make the cam bigger than it actually is, as long as the springs can handle it. Is this true? Yes, you're changing the ratio, right? So you get a higher ratio rocker. It's not necessarily making the cam bigger. The ratio has changed on it, to where if you think about it, you go from a 1.5 to a 1.7 rocker. That 0.2 difference is you're almost looking at 200, that's 200 thousandths. It's almost 1/4 inch. So you're going to gain quite a bit when you're talking ratio wise, that 0.2 inch.
Damien, all of the cam specs you ever read, well, not all, but almost all of the cam specs you ever read in anything for sale are going to be net at the valve. Okay, before deflection and everything, but after the rocker arms. And like, for example, small block Mopar has a 1.5 rocker ratio. So if you see a lift figure of, say, 0.484, that's not at the lobe, that's at the valve. And that's
it's
going to
all based on
rocker
factory rocker ratio.
Right.
So when you're looking at factory rocker ratio, that's what your cams are generally your lift numbers are based on. And so is your duration. Your duration will be a little bit larger too. It'll add like a degree or two.
That common purple shaft cam that has a 484 lift actually has 0.322 at the valve. And if you were to run it on a 1.6 rocker, you'd have 0.516, same cam.
Yeah. So all you're doing is changing the ratio. Now that ratio can work negatively against you because if you think about it, when you change the ratio, it's at a 1.6 ratio, or let's say you go from a 1.5 to a 1.7. Everything's at a 1.7 ratio for lift and duration, but also your valve spring pressures are working backwards against you across that ratio, right? So it's a 1.7 ratio. So if you got 300 pounds over the nose of let's say of the nose of the heavy part or the high lift part of the camshaft, it's now multiplied by 1.7 instead of 1.5. And so that's where you end up damaging rocker arms, or you break studs that hold the rocker arm in. That's where that number changes. Because if you think about it, if it's a 300-pound spring, work it backwards, you're looking at 1.7 times that 300 pounds, and that's what the pressure is on the opposite side of the rocker arm.
there's always trade-offs everywhere. Like sometimes with strength and deflection and things like that. Like the last thing you probably want to say a Hemi engine would be more exhaust to rocker ratio because those rockers are already a mile long and they break, right? Like a rear end gear, if you can have a different ratio in the transmission versus the rear end. Well, with the rear end gear, the deeper the ratio is, the smaller the pinion gets. So there's sometimes strength advantages to be found in where you balance your ratio, and cam versus rocker would be one of them.
And he's Chris Cox is saying the modifieds had 3 inch main. So 351 modified. The 400 modified is considerably bigger. It's like 3.5 or 3.25.
Danny Boyd, when he ordered rockers, he just said all of it.
Dakota's saying they say going from a 1.5 to 1.6 rocker is an extra 2 degrees at 50 thousandths. Plus or minus. It's really
yeah.
But it's really the height that you're gaining. So you want to make sure if you're going to change that your head has a flow number up to the valve lift that you're wanting to use, because you may not be gaining anything whatsoever.
I had never gotten to play with a flow bench before until I was at DV's place one day. And it is amazing when you just keep moving that and you just keep watching it, and there's just a place where it just shuts off. It's like at that point you could just take the valve out, it wouldn't matter. It's done. Right.
Mm-hmm.
And so I still see a lot of people that think, well, more and more lift is more and more power. I'm like, nope, not if your head's already done.
If your head runs out, yeah.
If you run out of head. Dakota thinks a 351 Cleveland will be better than a comparable 460 Ford.
Let's see. Well, no, they're actually, the engines are very similar. So way back when the Cleveland first came out, it was first introduced as the Boss 302, right? And originally it was just essentially the heads, I think. And then it became the 335 series engine. The 335 was the Cleveland. That was the in-house Ford name for the Cleveland.
Yeah.
But the 460 was the 385 series. And they used the same rocker arms, to be honest with you, and valve springs and retainers and all that stuff to share across the board. The one that's the odd duck out here is the one that it's like the 400 Mopar. You know how everyone loves the coveted 400 Mopar because of the big bore, short stroke, long rod. That the 400 modified Ford is not really a modified. It's a 400 cubic inch Cleveland is what it is.
Yes.
And the problem with it was in the United States, when we came out with the Cleveland, it only saw about 2 years before you got smacked with unleaded fuel and emissions requirements. And so there was only a few years where the Cleveland was actually really healthy, the way it was designed and built to begin with. And the magic behind the Cleveland from the factory was a lot of it was compression. You had to have the compression to make it work. And unfortunately, when the 400 came to the game, you're already looking at, 87 octane, unleaded, catalytic converter, EGR smog dog crap. And they were showing up with like 8-to-1 compression, but the piston would sit in the hole like 140 thousandths. Yep. When you put the piston down that far in an engine that was designed for compression and quench, they were detonation prone so bad that and plus I think the cams had 4 degrees taken out of them from factory advance. So they were technically ground like 4 degrees retarded compared to a early Cleveland, like 71 Cleveland or 70 Cleveland. But the 400 is the one that's like the unsung hero. You can build a healthy 400. You just put some good pistons in it and you put some good Cleveland 4-barrel heads on it, and voila, you got something that's really worthwhile.
I've always kind of figured that, but you just don't see much of it.
Let's see. Yeah, there was somebody did one actually on YouTube not too long ago. I do love my what if engines, and that's like everybody that knows me knows that's true. I mean, I love my what if 300. I do have something in the queue that's a what if Chevrolet product
that
I'm working on. But the 400, I kind of wonder what would have happened to the muscle car era had that 400 Cleveland been put together like, say, a 71 Boss motor? Um, it would have been a game changer for sure. Let's see. Danny Boyd says my rockers are the same ones which came on the 93 to 95 Cobra and early 351 Lightning, green manufacturer, but with a Ford part number. Those things used to be all the rage, and they worked fantastic with an E-cam. Oh, well, Chris Cox is saying the 400 modified as a 3-inch main as well. That's where we get the early Stroker Windsor cranks from. Oh, I thought they'd cut them down. I'm pretty sure that I thought they cut them down. Oh, that's my mistake.
Blue Grit's asking if the 400 main would crack in the lifter bore due to casting. I don't know. That's out of my wheelhouse. I know the big block Mopars, it's around the mains is where they usually get it, but every engine's got their place.
So here you go. Dakota was asking that earlier. Fab Race Mod repeats saying the 335 series is a scaled down 385 series engine. And that's what was cool about the big block Ford. It virtually was the same cylinder head pattern on a big block Ford as it was. And that's why if you go back and look at early years of Pro Stock, well, not early, if you look at the 80s of Pro Stock, Ford had no problem because the stroke on the 460 was so short that when they started stroking them out, you could easily make like a 600 cubic inch mountain motor. And that's where, Bob Glidden was literally running away with the Pro Stock program because, I mean, they were making gonzo power on those things, and the heads flowed like nothing else. And, that's the 385 series was probably the best when it came to mountain motor Pro Stock because the guys were making like 720 cubic inch motors. And you know what it took for a Chevrolet to do that? I mean, you're talking tall deck blocks, and then they could generally only get them out to about 600 cubes. And then just the Fords would stomp all over them. The bigger the bore you put on that Cleveland style head, the better they ran. So let's see. Oh, so Chris is saying that Dallas, you cut the crank snout down to put it on in the Windsor. Oh, okay, so it's a shorter crank snout. I knew they were cutting the cranks. I thought it was the mains they were cutting. Okay. Dakota's saying met an old guy in Whitewell that had a few 427 sock motors. Also had a dent side F100 with a 400 aluminum heads and nitrous. A little old guy in a wheelchair, and said he takes it out and whoops up on Mustangs. Oh, I'm telling you, man, there ain't nothing like a Cleveland. And from what I've never tried it, but from what I've asked, there's a certain guy that I keep in touch with named Animal Jim Foyer, and he used to run AHRA Pro Stock back in the day when you could run a small block with nitrous, and then it evolved. Once the AHRA went away, it evolved into the UDRA, and they kind of adopted the same rules, and then from there it became Pro Mod. And Animal Jim said there is no engine that he's ever dealt with that runs like a Cleveland does on nitrous. And so I really want to try it out one day, but I don't think my C4 can handle it or my wallet. Yeah. Let's see. Clayton's Toolbox. 385 and 335 series engines are totally different, except I think the distributor interchanges. No, there's a lot of things on the valve train that interchanges, but they are completely different engines. I mean, they were made for two intended different purposes, but the head is a very similar design across both. Let's see. The 400 Ford has cracked heads easily and has thin cylinder walls. I think that the 400 Fords, when they came out, they were what they called the open chamber Cleveland style head, which was a 2V open chamber. And I think that it was important. And I don't know if it was the heads cracking easily on them. They used to detonate so bad with the piston sitting down in that bore and the cam being retarded by 4 degrees. he said detonate so bad. I kind of wonder if it was the detonation that caused the hits to crack, or you know what I mean? Like, was it really a head problem, or was it really just a whole combination trying to make it run on 87 octane fuel problem?
We've seen a lot of things where you'll have this problem that becomes widespread, and it really has nothing to do with the problem. It's what a lot of people were doing in response to it and that kind of thing. And we see these things get carried on and on and on.
Yeah, Fabrice Mod repeats says Cleveland's love nitrous and so do Cleavers. I know it's the meds, man. It's the magic between the heads. Let's see. He's Danny Boyd saying early 400s came in LTDs, Galaxies, and Trinos and probably weren't as bad. I like to tell you the truth. I don't. There was rumors, and I've never seen one. I've never played with a 400, but it was something that I always wanted to play with because it's just such an oddity, and people used to take them out, throw them away, and put like a 351 Windsor in them.
You know what? What Matt Travers says the 400 Ford had great potential. It came out at the wrong time. I remember when 360 Chryslers were just, how much can I get for that in scrap, right? And a 360 is just a 340 with a slightly bigger main and 40 thousandths less bore. That's it. The cylinder walls are thicker. You could get them in roller cam. A 360 is a better basis for a hot rod engine. But the 340 already had its legacy, and the 360 for a long time. Now people realize, they're a good place to start. They're a good place to build.
Right, they have good potential.
Oh yeah, and the Ford engines are like that too.
Yeah, the 400. See, what I was getting ready to say was, I heard rumors of there used to be Clevelands with 4-bolt mains, the 351 Clevelands with 4-bolt mains, and I'm almost certain there's 400 Clevelands with 4-bolt mains, or would have the potential because it's based off of the 351.
Yeah.
So I always wondered if there was 400 Clevelands with 4-bolt mains, and those blocks would be considerably stronger, you would assume.
Clayton there.
Levi's saying we're talking pro stock when it was pro stock. Yeah, up until the nitrous scandals and all that stuff. But man, that's when it was fun. It was literally fun because these guys would tour the country, and John loves pro stock from that era too.
Oh,
so
yeah.
I mean, what was neat was they tour the same car. They go to NHRA events and they'd put their 500 cubic inch motor in them, and then maybe the next weekend they'd be match racing somewhere in Minnesota, and they'd put their mountain motor in it. Then they'd show up at IHRA Pro Stock and they'd run another fresh mountain motor, right? And it'd be like gloves off. Every weekend was a new, bigger mountain motor. It was nuts, man. It was fantastic. And
a lot of people don't realize, like when Lee Shepard, he won NHRA championships 81, 82, 83, 84. And who knows what would have happened had he not died in March of 85. But the thing is, people don't realize he was also out there running IHRA in between all of that. Today's touring professionals never do stuff like that.
No, they don't leave their circuit.
No.
Yeah, that's where it was like when I was trying to get the AHRA really rolling, and I had this idea. I wanted to do an invitational, right? Where you could take any year, essentially pro stock from the days they were considered pro stock up until today, and then do an invitational shootout, and it'd be mountain motor versus 500 cube versus whatever, and you just invite them. If they turn it down, you use it as your leverage, right? Oh man, the Rear Morrison guys turned it down, don't want to run in a true real deal gloves off pro stock shootout, and that was the thing is I liked the controversy of trying to fix stuff and put it back the way it's supposed to be, because I really truthfully believe this is a motorsport and the skill is all on the driver. It really has very little to do with the car. It should be all on the driver. And that's why I hated the electronics. I hated the delay boxes. I hated throttle stops. I hated all that stuff because it was no skill.
Everything is like that when there's competition and money involved. I know a few of the founding members of IDPA that sanctions pistol matches. And Ken Ackathorn was asked, how long is it going to take the people who gain this to ruin it for everybody else? He said 5 years.
Yeah.
And that's what happens in race classes too. It's the same thing. We've
Yeah.
watched it happen with everything.
And I was prepared for it. When I did the GT class, when I let the GT class fly, which was essentially the first 2 years of pro stock, applied to any car today, right?
Yeah.
And I thought it was going to just blow up. And my preparation was you leave the rules as they are. The third year, you change them because you identify trends in the first 3 years and you change the rules to eliminate the trends. That's what I was trying to do. But literally, any of those classes, the max you're going to get out of them is probably 5 to 7 years. And then they'll just be done by money, right? So
say hi to Nick the Van Man. He's here, and SSR Performance has something interesting there too.
I haven't got down that far yet.
Yeah,
Fab-based model repeat says there's 4-bolt 400s, and they were used in industrial applications like water pumps and generators. They are stupid rare. I believe Myodon made conversion caps for them. That's cool.
You talk about pro stock being pro stock. Buddy Ingersoll actually ran a car that you could buy. He had a combination you could buy. No one else did.
Oh, I loved, and there's a video here on YouTube I've watched 100,000 times, which is essentially an IHRA race where they let Buddy Ingersoll enter that turbocharged Buick in their Mountain Motor Pro Stock class, and it started just weeding through them. And
that's a wonderful video. If you've not seen it, you're missing out.
Yeah, go watch that immediately after this because you want to know who's the biggest crier in that? His name is Bob Glidden, believe it or not. And that, Bob had a stranglehold on pro stock back in the day during that period. And it didn't matter if you were running IHRA Mountain Motors or NHRA 500 cubic inch stuff. Bob had a stranglehold on it. And when that Buick showed up, they were crying. And it was like, the neatest thing was he had to run Bob Glidden in the finals for the Eliminator. And Bob beat him, no doubt about it. But Buddy Ingersoll had 7 mile an hour on him at the top end of the track. If it would have been, you're racing 1321 feet, Bob might have been singing a different tune, But that's the thing that sucked was Buddy Ingersoll was literally the only person there at the track that you could go down and buy a car like that, and it's supposed to be pro stock.
And I'm going to put the link in here to that very video we're talking about. Save it, watch it after this. It's definitely worth a watch.
Okay, so Buick Smith. This is something I've dabbled in, so I'll read it off. Okay, the 225 Oddfire has the same main bearing size and rods as the 300. What do you think a safe RPM would be on the 6-cylinder? Well, it probably would be no different than the 300. And I got that Jack the Giant Killer. That sucker would bury the tack. It would rev so fast that the tack could still be climbing and the motor would be back to idle. It was so snappy. I'd say probably 6,500. I think they'll rev pretty good to 8,500 or so. Now, here's something that's really interesting. The Oddfire V6 shares the same main bearings as the Evenfire V6, which also shares the same main bearings as a 300 Buick. But if you go look up the main bearings, you can buy a complete 180 or a 360-degree groove in the main bearing for the turbocharged V6 Buick. You cannot get them for a 300. So you buy two sets of main bearings for a V6 Buick. And now you got some race main bearings for your 300 Buick, which I thought was interesting. That's what I really like about the 300. That and here's another interesting fact. You can buy the billet main caps for a V6 Buick. They just so happen to fit on a 300 Buick, and you just got to buy a second main bearing or a main cap, and you can put billet main bearings in a 300. Anything you can do to a V6 Buick, you can do to a 300, and that's why I'm digging on them these days. Let's see. Oh, man. Nick the Man is saying Buddy's cars were all set up and unassuming, much like Dick Landy. Landy's engine sounded much tamer than guys like Sox and Martin, but dominated. Yeah. Landy was odd. He was one of the few guys that was running pro stock out on the West Coast, and there was not a lot of guys running pro stock on the West Coast. You had Leal, I think Donald Don was from out that way. I don't remember, but I do know. Maybe not. I ran into his daughter at the swap meet, a Long Beach swap meet, and then ended up she had a cam for one of his cars for sale out there at the Long Beach swap meet. I don't know if I ever. I don't have my phone on me. She had a cam that was out of one of his pro stock Cleveland days. And I'm like, that is so cool. It was ground by Crowler. And I was looking at it, had the cam card. But what was really cool is I snapped a picture of it. It's like, when you do a custom cam, it has you put your name in there and what you're doing and who you are and what profile you want, right? And it was Dino Don's cam, and that was so freaking cool to me on the cam card. So I snapped a picture of it, but then I got to looking at it later, like, you know what? I got Cleveland headed Windsor. I wonder if I should get the cam remade.
What was she asking for the cam?
Oh, it wasn't very much. It was like $350, and I could have bought the thing, but it was for a Cleveland, and I didn't have a Cleveland. Let's see. Levi's Backyard Performance. I read that a body in white Camaro is like 10 grand. Okay. Back in the 80s, every manufacturer that ran pro stock used to have a body in white program where you could literally order under a part number an entire body in white. Because they expected you to cut the floor, the firewall, all that stuff was going to be put over a tube chassis. 10K is a little steep, but I don't know what's in reference to, because a new Camaro is probably like 60 grand, right?
Yeah, it sounds to me the number's probably still proportional.
It probably is proportional, because way back when, like, my T-Bird was available body in white. It was a Bob Glidden poster. If you went in the Ford Motorsport office, there was a Bob Glidden poster hanging up above every freaking door, and it had listed all part numbers for Ford pro stock body in white stuff. And you could literally go in there and say, I want a M291 621. And it might be about, $2,000 for that body in white. But back then, a car was only about, you could get one of them T-Birds probably about 18 to 20 grand, So 10K probably is not too far off in direct relation to what the price of the Camaro is.
I was trying to figure out here a few years ago what the last race that a car that was made from an actual body, or even a body in white, tried to enter the field in pro stock. And the latest I could find any evidence was 1986. An NHRA race in 1986. Somebody had a Camaro that was made from a real body, because you could see the door jambs and everything, and you could tell it was a real body. And nobody else was there had it. I don't know if he made the field or not, but he was there. I've always thought that was interesting to me. And in NASCAR, the same thing. Yeah, like 1986. I know for sure that at least one race in 1986, because there's a YouTube video of it. It shows Steve Evans, do a pit reporting.
Where he went and bought an actual car. And then
this guy used a real body to make a third-gen Camaro to qualify for pro stock field. I don't know where he qualified or not. And in NASCAR, I've tried to figure that year out too. And it seems to me like, I know with Petty, his Superbird was not made from a production body, but the one he had right before that was. I don't know if the Roadrunner was, but I know that his 67 car, I think that's a Belvedere or something, in 67, I know it was. And so it's hard to figure out when everybody, because there's a transition right in there where everything was changing over to not be made and made from panel cars.
Right. It became roof and quarters.
Yeah,
and that's what's funny about the street outlaw stuff is roof and quarters. It's got to be a roof and quarters. And like that rule came from pro stock racing is where that came from.
Well, pro stock now has to run, I think, a factory headlight assembly, a factory taillight assembly, a trunk skin, a roof skin, and they just build panels all around it.
Yeah. And most of it's carbon fiber. Back then, they were bodies in white up until like 1989. Is it 89 where it changed? Where
something in there?
Yeah, 89, 90, where they no longer did the bodies in white. I want to say it was when they went to the front wheel drive cars. So it was like 88, 89.
Fabrice Lottery Pete's saying he thinks 86. I don't know. If that's the case, that's pretty close because Mopar was running their first attempt in pro stock with that Daytona was 87, and they went nowhere until they started spraying them, supposedly.
So Dylan Levi saying he always wanted to run a pro stock or something similar. However, outside of NHRA, they would ruin. That was the whole idea behind when I re-resurrected the GT class and the AHRA was you could give a home to somebody that had. I mean, I'm telling you right now, the 80s pro stock era was probably hands down the best. If you're looking at now, don't get me wrong, the late 60s, early 70s stuff was really bitching, but just I'm talking like in competition. The 80s was cutthroat and it was good and it was fun and cool and enjoyable. And that was kind of the idea, was to bring something back where the regular guy could compete. Because if you think about it, like the first 2 years of pro stock, they were virtually just a car. And if you applied that same recipe to any car, even made up to today, if you look at it, even the Copos, if you take that blown whatever LS motor out and you just put a big block Chevy in it, that's the same recipe. It's the same dang recipe. It's got to have factory pickup points. And so that was kind of the idea. They're not that complicated or expensive to build. For about, I guess, 15 grand, you could have something that would be competitive.
I'm going to grab real quick Buick Smiths just because I want to put the link up to it. No, Ingersoll's Buick, somebody has restored that. It's out there.
Somebody bought that.
Yeah, that thing is actually still being run, I think, as exhibition. And I'll put a link up to it here in a second. But with what we were already talking about, SSR Performance, they were real steel during the Cavalier Cobalt days. Well, they were tube chassis cars, but I know that the Pro Stockers were running a factory steel trunk skin, roof skin, I think. They were metal skin panels. And they might still be to this day. I don't know.
The Cavalier Cobalt days, you didn't order body in white. That's what we're talking about, is when the body in white days ended, because when you did a body in white, it came to your house essentially from the firewall back, right? It had no doors on it, but you had the floor, you had the firewall, all that stuff to contend with. And what happened was the race shops would buy them and they'd cut the firewall and the floor out and sink it down over your tube chassis body. The Cavalier Cobalt days, they ordered the panels.
Yeah.
And they just assembled the panels on the outside of the car, the exterior of the car.
Exactly. Well, you still had some of the factory endoskeleton with body in white. So to me, that was more of a real car.
Yeah, not much. The body in white. Okay, if you really want to see something super interesting, go look at like the late Mopar days. It would be like mid to late 70s Mopar days. Because everyone was running the small cubic inch, small cars. It was before, what was the Colt? They had one that was called the wire car. And if you don't know what the wire car is, that thing is so freaking cool. They cut all the internal structuring of the car out and held it together with literal wires that were dangling inside the car to hold strength in the body so it didn't buckle. But that was the last days of the Duster, the Demon, or the Dart Sport, before they went over to the imports, the small imports, the Colt and the Plymouth Arrow.
Here is a link for you guys for later if you want to save it. It is on that Buddy Ingersoll car. Little piece on what that car is doing today. It still exists.
Oh, Nick DeVamian saying homologation. Okay, you get it. I'm not going to try to say it. I can't say it.
Homologation.
I can't say it. God dang it. It was much more honest back then. The cars and all the skunk works were like Hearst, Demmer Engineering, Motion, Yenko, Grand Spalding. So we're so much closer to track use. Yeah. Okay. Uh-oh. Wyatt's here. He wants to come in. Cool.
Speaking of body in white, Blue Grit says body in white were lighter without the seam sealer. What's happening, man? But they did have more spot. But did they have more spot wheels to stiffen the chassis? I would think no. I mean, I don't think they did anything different other than they didn't have any seam sealer, didn't have any wiring, didn't have any rubber at all.
Remember the way they went from the factory was you stamped the panels, you welded them on, and then they didn't spray them. They didn't spray the bodies. They used to go through a dip.
Yep.
And then they negatively charged the body and positively charged the paint, and then dip it, and it would suck the paint onto it, and then it would literally just crawl out the other end. And that's where the body in white was taken off of that framing and pretty much put on a truck and sent to your house.
We have in the house the voice of the AHRA No Name Nationals, Mr. Ron Ward, mostly old parts.
Let's see. And he says, this past weekend, Steve Couch showed up at the Lucas Oil Drag Racing Series race at Flying H with one of 3 built factory 2010 Challengers with a 5.9 Magnum. You know, and that's something that went away when those cars were first offered, like 08 and 10 and stuff like that. They had small block derivatives that were allowed to be run in stock Eliminator. And that's what was cool. And then all those options kind of went away and in focus of, you know, in lieu of the supercharged, whatever modular, you know, new stuff. But
I think those new Challengers just need a good old 440. Just a good old 440. You know, it would fit, right? They're rack and pinion cars.
Oh, so what would you like to talk about?
I don't know.
You don't know? Okay. Well, this is all car centric. So you're going to tell everybody how you went to the Southeast Gassers at Cruising the Coast?
I don't really remember it.
Well, you did. You remember the Pink Panther? Was it fun to watch?
Yeah, it was okay. It was really funny to see a cartoon character, well, a car based on a cartoon character. It was fun to see that because a young fan base, like kind of like me, would like to see that.
I'm sure you would. That's why they did those. That's what they used to do back in the 60s. Did you like how they bounced around the track when they would shift gears?
Yeah.
All right. Well, let's see. Chris Cox is saying that Body in White has no seam sealer, no extra welds on the few I've been involved with. And I've only seen them to where, like, when they used to do stories about this stuff in the magazines, they would explain a lot of it. And I mean, I'm no expert. I've never seen one except for at the track, you know, and unfortunately, Bob Glidden or even Animal Jim didn't let me climb around in his car, look at seam sealer and welds. But they were literally just off the line pieces, assembly line pieces. And so where they were pulled off, they got no excess. Like your seam sealer would have been probably the next step, you know, the sound deadener, the seam sealer, all that stuff after the car is coming out of the dip and is being hauled up the assembly line. They would start getting the stuff to assemble them as a car. So it's right after whatever they got for paint. There probably was no extra structuring or gusseting or any screwed in stuff or riveted in stuff for extra weight. Let's see. Yeah, well, he's here checking things out, making sure we're on the straight and narrow.
Is that a surfer shirt? Miss Catgy asks.
Oh,
it's a skeleton on a skateboard called the kick flip.
Okay. All right. Yeah, see, Ron Ward's saying that the car is based on a cartoon character, the Plymouth Roadrunner. You remember the Roadrunner on the beep beep? Remember that? They actually had a car based on that from Plymouth.
Mostly old parts. Ron Ward follow up to that as a great question. A Dynacorn Mustang or Challenger body. Does it qualify as a body in white? What do you think, Dallas?
I don't see why it wouldn't, because the original bodies in white had no VIN numbers. Matter of fact, you had to sign a waiver when you got them and said that they weren't eligible for street use or titling or licensing at all. There was a cheesy movie made in like the early 2000s where a guy was supposedly driving around like a BO-23 Hemi, or a Barracuda, Hemi Barracuda. Isn't that like 68, 69 Hemi Barracuda, the BO-23? Isn't that what they're called?
A BO-29 would be the Barracuda.
29? Okay.
And LO-23 would be the Dart.
Okay. All right. Well, either way, I'm not a Mopar guy, so please don't beat me up on that. But the thing is like, this guy's driving around and you're like, nah, that would have never happened. This car never even came with any kind of paperwork to get a title. It didn't even have a VIN, right? Let's see. Buick Smith is asking, did you get a chance to watch Camp Cretaceous?
No.
Okay.
Dizzy says, I'm a D body. That would be a truck, wouldn't
I'm
it?
a D body.
Or is that an Imperial?
I think the D stands for Disney. I don't know. Okay. I was saying.
Blue Grit Garage says the new Dynacorn Mustang and other Camaro bodies are the new bodies in white. You know, to be honest with you, you can literally go get anything made before 2005, and it's literally a body in white because you're only going to pay like a couple grand for it. Just strip it down and get down to the bare body and build whatever you want. But if it was me, I always liked the idea of like taking some of the stuff that never was. You know, that like they're actually like Bob Glidden did the EXP. Somebody brought it up earlier, like Nick the Van Man. There was a Chevette Pro Stocker that showed up, but there was never any of the stuff like that would be interesting and neat. You know, like Chrysler made these turbocharged 4-cylinder cars in the 80s called like a Chrysler Conquest. Okay, nobody ever made a Pro Stock out of them. Why? I don't know. Would have been a freaking great body to have as Pro Stock, but it was all from overseas. It was all from Japan. The Chrysler Conquest was technically just a Mitsubishi Starion, but so was the Colt. You know, why did nobody make a Pro Stocker out of that stuff?
Levi's saying you can buy a Dynacorn 69 Camaro shell race ready for 10.5. Just for me, the Dynacorn stuff is just, it's Chinese. It's not an American muscle car.
It's Chinese.
I get it though, because there's only a finite amount of them. And as we go into the future, it's the only way to keep them alive. But it's weird for me, because in the future, it's going to be where you don't know everyone you see on the street if it was ever a real American produced car or not.
If it was me and I was starting all over and I was going to get into drag racing right now, I'd buy one of those bodies, because I think a 69 Camaro is one of the most beautiful cars ever made. I mean, they just hit the nail on the head, just like 70 Mustang, 69, 70 Mustang. They hit the nail on the head, right? 70 Challenger. 1970 was the pivotal year. But either way, 69 Camaro, if I was going to build something that looked like a 60s style drag car, I'd start with a Dynacorn body. One, it has no history. It doesn't cost anything, you know, to like, you're not taking a real ZL1 or something with major history like, what is it? The Blue Bayou. What was the Granny Goose? The Granny Goose Camaro, right? You're not taking that and chopping it up and making your own race car. It already has its own history. But a 69 Dynacorn body, that might as well be a 2024 Durka. And I mean, you can make whatever you want out of it. That's what's cool. You can make a legit looking race car. That's probably the cheapest way to go, because if you went and bought a 1969 Camaro and cut it all up, golly, you'd have a ton of money in it.
Dust Devil says he likes 71 to 74 for car design. I think the 70 is like the absolute maximum ordinance of automotive design. It went up to 1970 and down the other side, and the best cars are found 10 years on either side of that. So 71, 74 is great.
Yeah, Blue Garage is saying, is it Dynacorn from Taiwan? As far as I know what it is, it's a Taiwanese body.
Yeah.
And
well, Taiwan, you used to see Taiwan ROC, that stood for Taiwan Republic of China.
Yeah, but they're not their own celebrated country, right? So Let's see. Without getting all political, I'll just step on off to the right here. Okay. I I would build one. I would build one. I'd build a pro stocker out of one. I'd build like not a Grumpy Jenkins car because Grumpy did pretty cool Grumpy Jenkins car. I'd make my own, but I would have that tall scoop on it. You know, the early pro stock, whatever you want to call it, mailbox or bug catcher, whatever you want to call it. Yeah, well, there isn't much cutting up because it's literally a body in white. It's like there's nothing there.
I mean, I think they should exist. I just think they should be made here and only here. That's just my opinion.
I don't think people could afford to buy them if they did that.
Well, it's because the people, if people didn't ransom what they spent to build them, yeah.
All right. So Sodbuster saying, listen to Bill Coolman's podcast. He mentioned that they're having a Legends of Pro Mod series possibly next year. The first year was supposed to be the COVID year. That's when they were supposed to do that. And that was 2020, right? So unfortunately, a lot of these guys are falling off the perch because they're getting so dang old. They better hurry up and do something. And I guess Mike Thermos was behind it with a bunch of money. But if you don't know who Mike Thermos is, go back and look at the early years of NOS.
Yeah. What the first few years of Pro Mod so cool though? Bill Coolman and Jim Audie and Tim McCamus and
Animal Jim
Smith. Oh yeah, man, it was fun. Oh, even Ronnie Sox.
Yep, Ronnie Sox was in there, and so was Dino Don.
Yeah.
Let's see. In 1994 or 5, I went to US 41 and I watched a national event there for IHRA, and they had pro stock, or it was a pro mod shootout back then. And it was, the cool thing was, Animal Jim was he was pretty much local to me. He just lived straight west where I did, about 70 miles. So.
Dust Devil Garage, he mentions, we're talking about that 1970. I think the drugs kicked in the 71, the crazy stuff. Well, that whole time period in the country, the cars reflected that. So Chrysler had the high impact colors, you had the mod top, and you had all that crazy stuff. So yeah, you started getting it. Mid-year 69 is about when that started. In 70, it hit hard. In 71, I think it hit even harder.
Well, Miss Cat G here is saying that GTHO 1971 Fords in Australia are 350,000. So if you've never seen one of these, they call it the GTHO Phase 3. I mean, I guess you can get the Phase 1 and 2 as well. I'm not sure, but if you really like, those things are literally like the last year of the Falcon in the United States, 69 Falcon, because 70 it became the Maverick, right? We got rid of the Falcon and we went to the Maverick. But Miss Cat G, you could fly over to the States, buy a 69 Falcon for about $3,500. It'd be a 2-door, and it'd be just like one of those GTHO Phase 3s, and you can make a 2-door GTHO Phase 3 car. I know the 4-doors is the ticket over there, the Riot, but that Falcon in the States is not worth much, and most people don't really do anything with them. Let's see. Mostly old parts. Ron Ward says early Pro Mod was only overshadowed by the early Nitro Coupes. And that was, man, the 80s was freaking fantastic to be a kid drag racing, It really was.
I remember those very first few years of Pro Mod before they got the recipe down, so to speak, when you didn't really know what Pro Mod was going to be. Can you imagine Pro Mods, pulling the front wheels about a foot on launch? It just seems insane now to think of that, right? Because now they have everything so progressive with the clutch, and the wheelie bars are low, and the weight transfer is perfect, and they're just missiles, right? But that first year, they didn't have a handle on stuff, and you'd watch some pretty gnarly launches in Pro Mod.
Danny Boyd saying Aussies don't mind 4-doors. That's because all the hot stuff that they had down there came with 4-doors. There's a couple of them that weren't, like you had your Ford Cortinas, and there was a Holden Monaro, but there was also some smaller stuff that they didn't have the 4-doors, but a lot of the hot stuff came with 4-doors. It was just like the ticket down there. The one that I really was gaga over when I was living there was I was walking down the street and there was this Chrysler Ute. And I'd never seen one. It looked like a Dart. It was kind of mixed between a Dart wagon and because I don't think they made a Dart wagon, did they? Did they ever make a Dart wagon?
They made like a Valiant. They did make a derivative A-body wagon, but they didn't make it in the 67 and up years, except in Mexico. They had something like that in Mexico, 67, 8, and 9.
Huh. Well, it was such an oddity. It looked so weird. It looked like a Dart, right? Is really what it looked like. But it was a Ute. And I mean, it was just sitting there on the side of the street. And my wife and I went in and ate some pizza at this pizza joint. And man, that dude fired that sucker up. And I don't know what was in it, but it was healthy. It sounded really good. But it was just weirdest looking thing because I'd never seen a Dart wagon. And that's really what it looked like the most.
Yep. Well, in Mexico, they did have a Dart style of wagon, 67, 8, 9, somewhere in there. And it was really interesting. I've never seen one in person. I've seen pictures. Mexican Spec has sent me pictures of them.
Huh.
They existed.
Ron Ward said, I was sitting on the mic in Wichita, Kansas when Junior Sandlin and Scotty Palmer came to the line with the first ever pair of Top Fuel coupes.
Wow.
Junior in the Chevelle and Scott in the Studebaker. And that was some wild stuff there too. And that was early to mid 90s. That's where that was getting really, well, no, I guess the first ever would have been right after was Coolman doing his 200 mile an hour pass, right? Because then that what he was doing was
I remember that.
natural methane and the
he jumped right over and went to 202 to walk away with that.
Yeah.
Ron mentions that the Dart was a Dart station wagon 63 to 66. I knew there was a Valiant. He confirms there was a Dart, but I think only in Mexico could you get a derivative.
This was like a 67 to 69 Dart.
Right. That had to be Mexican. Had to be.
Yeah. No, it wasn't Mexican. It was Australian.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah, and I guess Mrs. Catchy's here saying the VJ.
Yeah.
VJ. So that's what the body style was down there. Like that, if you talk cars down there, you got to throw in the body style with it. Like he was saying the GTHOs those are like XYs, I think, is what the XY Falcon. It took me a while to kind of pick up on the lingo, but it was essentially the body style name went along with the car, right? It's like the Falcon from the Interceptor that everybody remembers from Mad Max. That's like an XA Falcon, I think, or XB. I don't remember, but they were never offered in the States.
Dallas, if you can grab that comment from 804 Dizzy Izzy's there, I will post a link to it as well.
804 Dizzy Izzy?
Yes.
Oh, well, I missed a whole bunch of stuff. How did I blow all past this?
It happens. And I'm going to post a link to it right here. So Barkley Schmidt, who helps us run the No Name Nationals, he wants to participate this year. Now, he is not yet registered, but he wants to make a run at the No Name 500. So there's a link to his channel. He's got some neat stuff up there. If you go over there, why don't you make a comment and ask him when he's going to register? And if he doesn't have the comments turned on yet, shame on him, because I told him yesterday that he needs to turn his comments on. So,
but he did announce yesterday that he was going to do this, right? If you remember, Barkley was the organizer.
Yeah, Barkley was helping us run everything, like help run the lanes and tractor and so forth. And he's helped us on staff for 2 years, but this year he wants to participate now that Possum's crew has it staffed. And so he's got 91 days and 2 hours and 50 minutes to do it. And there's a link to his channel, but he's not yet registered. So,
and don't get turned off by this comment. Barkley doesn't have a very min 74 Cutlass. It's mean. I'll just give these the
so he's still learning. He's still learning the YouTube thing. He's got a video up with a thumbnail that looks like a kitchen cabinet, but when you get closer, it's actually the door of an enclosed trailer. And he shows his Cutlass. He shows Lindsay's Mustang, Junior Dragsters, and it's a good intro video. It's a really good intro video to who he is and his channel. Yeah. But it looks kind of like a kitchen cabinet in the thumbnail. But check him out, and if he has his comments turned on, ask him if he's registered.
Well, and then Michael Schmidt says, how do you guys see the future of drag racing sport and the ability of tracks to resist selling property? Oh, well, you'd- this is a this is a good, honest question. I'm going to try to give you a good, honest answer. I could see 10 years ago that this was going the way that it's going now, right? Now, if you ask Brett Kepner, there's more tracks in the United States than there ever has been before, which would tell you that drag racing is healthy. But it's also the same kind of answer that you hear when you ask, when you see the daily news reports and you got the I don't know, whatever incumbent party has the White House these days answering this question, how do you see the economy? Oh, it's doing fantastic, even though you can't make rent and you're borrowing just so you can get money for groceries and stuff like that. Everyone's going to tell you it's great, it's good. It is not what it once was. And I think a lot of it has to do with we've had 15 years now of everything gasoline is bad, right? And it really has impacted the whole entire, not just drag racing, but the automotive community. Parts are hard to get because they've all been outsourced overseas. Fuel prices are way up. Where I see the sport of drag racing, if we don't take the time to really foster this, you're going to have a few holdout tracks, and that's all you're going to end up having. And the rest of them are going to be the one event per year, and that's all they do. If you don't believe that's the truth, go and look at Chicagoland at the Chicagoland drag strip there. They built that sucker in 1997 or something, and it literally sat there languishing until they had a national event, and that was the only time the place was open. And then it closed down during COVID and then reopened until they started doing a few things there, but the sportsman still is not allowed back, right? So there's I think the focus is on the big money events, and that's it. And then, but the problem is you have to be able to look at baseball. If baseball just had professional level and had nothing else, how long would baseball last? You don't have a AAA team to pull from. You don't have anybody that's vetting people. Where does your professional come from? And then how enjoyable would it be to watch? That's the question. And that's
February Smod Repeat says, look at NASCAR. They're struggling the most. But NASCAR asked for it. I mean,
so Blue Grit Garage is saying you would think a small town that lost a factory would welcome a Dynacorn type business. The small towns have a lower cost of living, and if greed does not kick in, it may work. Made in the USA. It's not so much greed as is who is all the stakeholders with all the money. Okay, do you make a body from 1969, or do you try to get in Chrysler's pocket or Tesla's pocket, and that's where it goes.
Hey, Blue Grit, if it weren't for all the regulations making it cost 3 times more than it needs to, I think we could do it.
Right. If you haven't realized this, you're at war with the EPA. The EPA is the one that's dictating that your car hobby goes away. Right. You haven't realized that you're behind, and it's probably going to get our show shut down permanently. I hate the EPA. I hate them. They are literally a bully that's unelected, and they come in and shut you down because they don't like your chrome plant, or they don't like that you make diesels faster or more reliable. The biggest ticket was when Volkswagen sold those TDI Volkswagens, right? And they had the emissions scandal. Okay. If the thing's getting, let's say, 20% better than projected fuel economy, how is it polluting more? It's more efficient. That's all it was. But you know what it was? It was that regular people could go out and buy this and beat what the regulation was. And they didn't like that because now you're getting away for things cheaper. We got to keep the stranglehold on. We got to keep the noose tight, right? You got to be barely making it, and you can't be financially free. And I'm not giving you the vehicle and the means to do that. And so the EPA went after I had two of them things, right? The EPA went after me as a person for buying it. Like I made an emissions cheating device on it. Like I lost my ass on those. I lost $70,000 worth of vehicles that I had bought that was supposed to be good for 10 years plus. I had to give them up. And then I lost my ass on them. You try to take them to the dealer and you're like, hey, I'd like to trade in this Dodge Ram with the EcoDiesel in it. No problem. Here's your $4,500. And you're like, it's a 6-year-old truck, right? Any other 6-year-old truck is still 30 grand. No, mine was $4,500. Where I screwed up is I should have went after Chrysler. I should have got a lawyer. I went after Chrysler, forced them to put a 6.4 Hemi in it. And that's what I should have done. Had the only 6.4 Hemi half ton.
Most of the old Parts Wrong Ward has one. And I'm not always necessarily like back-to-back rants, but let me tell you, what Ron has at 812 is spot on. If somebody that spends a lot of money and goes out on a limb to try to have something at a track where there's safety equipment and track prep and facilities and everything, and a generation that grew up on Street Outlaws just wants to race, I think it's twofold, Ron. I think it's one, they want to be cool like people on the street, but the other is when people just talk about racing on the street and bench race and go around and mess around on the street, there's never a time slip. There isn't a crowd and all of this stuff to have any proof of how somebody's car doesn't run. So the people who are full of crap and claim their cars are faster than they are, they can always camouflage that on the street and never have to actually show that their cars don't run what they claim they do, like they would at a track. But we don't engage in such stuff.
Yeah, it's cheated. You cheated. You got no leverage. So, yeah. So, Squares and Gears is saying what Dallas is describing about drag racing has already been happening here in Southern California. Irwindale is all we have left, and it's 8th mile only. And now there's a 300-foot track in the Inland Empire. And you know what? That 300-foot track is probably going to do really, really good in Inland Empire until they run out of land across the Southern California near the beach area, and then they start growing west or eastward, and they run into Inland Empire, which is a desert, because that's where they moved it to. But if you do remember way back when they used to be called Drag City, where you could literally go run at a track every night of the week, top fuel in Southern California, that was all farmland. Bakersfield's the only one that's still somewhat safe because it's in the middle of a farm. All the other ones, they're all gone. Carlsbad used to be really good. I couldn't believe how they were still holding out in the 90s, and all of a sudden they just folded, and now it's all high-rise apartments and condos.
Levi has a great one here. Ron, a high tax on imported goods that are priced way below our prices will help that. Yes, Levi, it's called a tariff. We used to have them, and we don't now. And we could have them again, and it would work. And you know who's big on tariffs is Australia. In Australia, if you want to drive a Honda Civic, you're going to pay a fortune to do so.
Yep, and that makes it comparative across. Like what it is
tariffs work.
They pay so much tariff, they pass it off onto the buyer, right? The consumer. And then when the consumer buys the product or sees the product on the shelf right next to the Made in America one, and it's almost the same ding price, it's kind of a no-brainer. You buy the high-quality Made in America piece, not the junk. But when all those went out the window, when was that? About 94, 96, somewhere around there.
Ron says Inland Empire will become a cannabis farm in 3 years. Man.
Let's see. Yeah, I wouldn't doubt that. Either that or a homeless farm. We'll close it down so the homeless aren't disturbed.
Buick Smith's talking about the Black Ghost Challenger. Yeah, that's an interesting tale right there.
Oh, well, go ahead and spin the tale. I don't know if I'm familiar with
I'm not the person to tell the tale, but it's a car that's quite storied, and then they dug into it. So
a chair.
I may dig up what I can on that and put it on a community post later tonight. But I wouldn't be good at telling it off the top of my head. But it was a guy who had a storied car, and then they got to digging into, well, what did it actually do?
Well, so it was a factory ringer.
No, not really.
Okay.
It was Levi's Goddard. It was fake news.
Oh. Let's see. Ron Ward saying, I'm going to change the subject. For the entry level garage hobbyist, what would you guys recommend for an air compressor? Oh, for the entry level garage hobbyist.
I'm gonna throw out there. Well, what are they doing with it, Ron? Are they just filling up bicycle tires and stuff, or do they need to run a blast cabinet?
You
Are they
know,
painting? If you can qualify, how entry level are we talking about? Because I have a recommendation.
I've seen a lot of guys with those like DeWalt stand up, like 30-gallon air compressors. And that to me is like what's replaced the good 5-gallon Craftsmans from back in the day that used to have those
Yeah.
really fast spinning
Those
compressors.
were good. Those were good. I'll tell you what. So my only experience with this is my buddy Ben has run an air, electric, hydraulic tool repair shop for 40 years, right? Like literally, his father started that shop the year he was born. And ever since he was a little kid, he's worked there. And their compressor that's head and shoulders above all of them is the Quincy.
So,
And Quincy makes a real expensive model, and they make a little bit more stripped down model to compete with the Ingersoll Rand and stuff. The Ingersoll Rand that you get now is not the Ingersoll Rand that you got 20 years ago. But the Quincy, I have faith, is still better. So if I was going to buy an upright compressor that's under $1,000 today, it would be that 60-gallon, etc. And that's based on all the stuff we would see that would come in blown up. The older Craftsman that has the oil free with the ball bearings, they were good. And then, like everything else, the quality took a nosedive. The Campbell Housefelds, I mean, I can't tell you how many of those we had come in with just pieces of connecting rod. I mean, the old Ingersoll Rand were good, but I would say that the best was the Quincy by far.
well, and I have one. It's made in America, matter of fact. But mine came from Farm and Fleet. I don't even remember who makes it. But I would never recommend to get the thing. It blew 3 head gaskets in 3 months.
Ron's saying make the requirement 120. I got to tell you, I have an older Craftsman sealed ball bearing style, the older ones. It's great.
That's 5-gallon ones, right?
Yeah, but it's a smaller tank. So it depends what you're
They
doing.
run like a watch, man. I mean, they're reliable.
Yeah, they do. They do. The older ones do. Yeah, I wouldn't buy anything Craftsman sells that runs on electricity now. Nothing.
No.
Nothing.
Craftsman is just all it is like they took the mask off of the Made in America Craftsman stuff and stuck it right on this Chinese dude over here, and it looks just like Craftsman.
Yeah. Okay, so when it comes to tools, like when their tools went to China, you could see it. You could see it a little bit in their hand tools, but their electric tools, you couldn't. You couldn't tell when that happened. When Winchester, when the name went overseas and it was no longer a New Haven, Connecticut Winchester, man, you could see it. It looked totally different. So some things it's easy to tell, some things it's not. But the Craftsman stuff looked the same. But man, it sure didn't work the same.
Well, okay. So here is a question from Schweers and Gears. Historical question for you guys. How do you get a 283 Chevy to run on 90% nitro like they did in Junior Fuel back in the day? Run and not explode immediately. That's no blower. When they ran 283 Chevrolets on 90% nitro was Junior Fuel, and those were just naturally aspirated. They would actually run for a long time. Even in Garlett's book, he talks about how naturally aspirated top fuel racing, the engine would last the whole season. And it wasn't until they started putting blowers on them and then really turning them up. Lots of boost, lots of nitro. That's when they started having problems.
Mark Shaw, my goodness, man, how you doing? I haven't seen you in ages. And he's wanting to know Max Performance 383. I'll tell you where there's a good one to see there, Mark. I cannot think of that dude's name. He's one of those West Coast Mopar guys on YouTube, and there's not that many of them. but he did a 383 stroker. He used a offset ground crank, did a 383 stroker. It was a really neat engine. Offset ground, used a smaller journal rod. That's the one I would look at. That guy did some really cool stuff with a 383.
Take 8,000 RPM. So Professor P and I talk every day, and he always says there's magic numbers: 6,500, 7,000, 7,500, and 8,000. Each one of those numbers requires so much more maintenance and heavy-duty, expensive material, right? So 6,500 is about what you're looking at for factory equivalent stuff that's race prepped. It's been lightened and balanced, and 6,500 is like not really too much of a problem. And with the bore stroke ratio and the rod length of that 383 Mopar, 6,500 probably is pretty easy.
Oh, 6,500 is easy, but that 8 is going to be a lot.
8,000 RPM, you're probably talking valve train, in excess of $2,000, and that's just your valve train.
Hey, Andy, how much difference is there between 6,500 RPM and 8,000 RPM?
I would assume that you're going to need some serious money in connecting rods.
Yeah.
And you're going to need, at that point, you're looking at serious money in crankshaft, like billet. I don't know if it's really financially feasible. And then I don't know if there's many of them out there.
No, I would think at that point you'd be going to an aftermarket block, and even then it'd be hard to find a block with even a bore that small, because you're only talking about a 4-inch 250. So that'd be tough. Ron's got the right idea. Use a 400 block with the 383 crank and all. Yeah.
Throw your wallet at the valve train.
No, that's good advice if we're working with factory parts. I totally agree.
And here's the sad part: when you start talking those kind of RPM, and when he's saying like throw your wallet at the valve train, is no lie, because here's this thing: is you're going to buy tool steel springs to get this thing to run with like titanium retainers, and it's just going to be super expensive parts, right, to get that kind of RPM out of it, and it still function. And here's the sad part is after you get done making your 10 passes that weekend, you go home, you take all the valve springs off, throw them in the trash, and buy another $700 set of valve springs. It's very cost prohibitive when you start talking high RPM, naturally aspirated stuff.
And are you going to an aluminum rod?
Yeah.
Got all that goes with that.
Or, I mean, even if you did billet rods, you're talking custom billet rods, they're not, none of that stuff is cheap.
No.
If you really want to know get an idea of what you're looking at, go look at a Windberg crank. Okay. Windberg crank will run at 8,000 RPM all day long and take whatever kind of abuse you throw at it. Right. But that's the kind of crankshaft that you're going to need to turn 8,000 RPM more than one time. So. Yeah, so Andy says RPM valve spring killer. So, yeah.
Michael Schmidt has a good question on this. What RPMs were 60s, 70s, and 80s drag racers? What class? I would love to know what the evolution of Pro Stock's RPM is. Like if you could take a class average of the RPM for every year of Pro Stock and look at it on a graph, wouldn't that be wild?
Well, you know what would be really interesting is that you would see the makes and models breaking out, or just makes breaking out different.
Yeah, you would.
Right. The Hemis used to run that. That's what killed the Hemi. It wasn't they couldn't compete. They put an RPM limit on them in like 2008 when they went to that fuel injection. 2007,
16 was the 10.5 RPM limit.
Okay. And that's what eliminated the Hemi in Pro Stock was that. They took the RPM capability out of them. And why? I don't know. There should have been other things that changed. They should have got rid of the tube chassis and no longer back half. And they should have went to a 10.5-inch slick.
Roy and Alan Johnson were turning their Hemi 11.5 or a little more. 11.5, 11.6, 11.7.
Yeah, and he said sometimes it tripped the lights at the top end, almost 12. So,
Yep.
But the thing is like when they started limiting that stuff, you start narrowing it down to manufacturers, right? But see that's what was neat is about way back when. What would be cool is that you'd have that graph. Let's say you had that graph, and it started in '68 when it was NHRA Pro Stock. Well, actually, AHRA Heads Up Super Stock, and then it went to 1970, became NHRA Pro Stock, and 1972 you would have seen the Grump show up with the 331 combo, and the RPM would have been just like off the scale, right? And a lot of that was rod to stroke ratio. It was just relatively scienced out. The 301, which is the drag racing engine that everyone's talking about, the 283 Chevy. Okay, the 283 125 over is the 301. That's what General Motors actually built for the DZ 302. That's the same combination that drag racers were using from the 60s. 125 over 283 Chevy. The rod to stroke ratio on it, almost 2-to-1. 3-inch stroke, almost a 6-inch rod. So you're looking at 1.91 rod stroke ratio. That's where the Grump was coming up with this stuff. It wasn't he didn't sit down and mathematically figure it all out. It was something that somebody had already done. Your 283 with a 3-inch stroke, the bore might have been smaller, but it still had the comparable rod to stroke ratio. So and that's something that somebody learned. So that's the magic behind some of that stuff, right? But 60s, 70s, and 80s, when you had modified production, there was 306s turning 10 grand, but they also learned that's where you kill valve springs. That's where you kill valve train. That's where really expensive valve train components came from. Matter of fact, that's where Jessel actually grew out of. And if you don't know Jessel rocker arms, that came into play because RPMs was a valve train killer.
Most of the old parts is saying that comp eliminator races, guys were killing 12,000 RPM tachometers.
Yeah. And here he's saying demodified production, 11,000 RPM small block Chevys and Cleveland Fords. They sounded absolutely amazing. They do. And that's why I did the nostalgia modified class in 2021, 2020, 21. I love them. I mean, when I grew up at the drag strip, that was the class that everybody was on the fence to see. Pro stock and nostalgia and modified production. They were just so mean sounding. I mean, the engine almost sounded like I don't know how to explain it. Like a pissed off sewing machine. They revved so freely and quickly. But yet, I don't know. It's just hard to explain.
You just have to really appreciate a high RPM engine for what it is. Because I know you can replace it and do a turbo and all that stuff, but there's still got to be a place for these naturally aspirated, high winding engines. They are an art of their own.
Oh, the NA that's where the true craftsman stuff.
Yeah.
The high RPM NA, and if you haven't figured it out, I like small cubic inch, high compression, high winding stuff. I do. And I'll tell you here now, I'm building one here really soon. That was a comparison of a factory engine. So it's going to be interesting to see how this is going to work. And I'm using all new technology stuff, but it's still going to have the same limitation as the early stuff did, the valve train. It's going to turn a lot of RPM, but let's see. Miss Cat G saying, anyone make oil spray for springs? I'm assuming that's all been done before. I don't know if you go out and buy any of that stuff off the shelf. A lot of those parts, high winding, small cubic inch modified production, that went away in the States. Essentially 82 would have been the first year that was free of modified production. A lot of those parts were made in-house. If you look, Ellison Machine Shop did a feature on a 300 cubic inch Ford inline 6 that had a Cleveland 4V head on it. and they had cut 2 Cleveland heads in half and furnace brazed them back together. And this thing was a 10,000 RPM 306, and it probably made somewhere close to 650 horse. But that kind of stuff right there was all done in-house. There was no shops making them. So
yeah, to say that naturally aspirated just about money is completely incorrect, because there's an art form to getting those engines to make that power that people that don't know without the money can't do.
is this what you're referring to here?
Mm-hmm.
It is only how has who has the most money. Pointless. No, it's not true at all. That's you guys turbocharged junk. All these classes way back when were all weight to cubic inch. They were all weight to cubic inch. It was the fairest form of class racing there probably was, because it was just like boxing, right? What you were looking for is like, what you avoided was guys like Andy Wood and David Vizard,
right?
That coax 3 horsepower per cubic inch, right? Those are the ones that you worried about. Any schlub at home could pretty much do 1.5 horsepower per cube, right? It was the guys like Vizard that would science this thing to death that you were worried about. And that was what Grumpy Jenkins did. They didn't spend a ton of money. Grumpy Jenkins didn't spend a ton of money. I mean, I'm sure he spent money, but when he was leading the game, it was all about, he'd have, 20 engines, and every one that he built for a customer, he'd learn something from and apply it to himself.
Ken says turbocharged junk is cheap and everyone can do it for pennies. Do what? Do that? I mean, if that's what you want to do that. It's just not the same thing. You know what that's like saying? That's like, I used to know some guys who were in the World Natural Bodybuilding Federation, right? And they were never as big as the IFBB guys, but they had a set of rules. They were drug tested, by their hair, drug tested to say they were naturals, right? And so it was never the same thing. So, it's kind of like the turbocharged junk thing. That's great. That's one discipline. And the NA thing is another. They're two different things, and you can enjoy them both.
So Ron Ward saying he was recently in a local race engine shop, saw a pair of small block Chevy iron heads in the jig set up for 2.375-inch intake valves.
On what bore?
In case you're wondering, the heads were for an A nostalgia dragster.
What block were they running those on? That is wild.
Yep. And so this is the other one you were talking about. Yes, anyone can do it, and it's cool. You get a big number out of it, but then you end up like, and you and Dylan Levi always argue every week when we have a show, right? And it's not about like this. I'm not saying you're arguing about this, but you guys always combat back and forth, talking amongst yourself about this kind of stuff, right? And if you haven't noticed, Dylan Levi was on here 2 weeks ago or 3 weeks ago talking about how the regular guy can't compete anymore. And that's because turbocharged junk was what it started out as until somebody built a 5.3 with good rods in it. And then they ran away with it. Then the next guy, he built a 5.7 LS with good rods in it. Then the next guy, he built a 6-liter LS with good rods and good pistons and all that stuff with a bigger hair dryer on it. And it outran everybody, and nobody could compete in the class. And then after that, it just got more and more and more and more. The NE stuff, like I said, was weight to cubic inch. You were trying to get as much horsepower as you could for the minimal amount of cubic inches you could. And a lot of it was factory small block stuff, right? Like, you ever heard of a Turbofire Chevrolet small block head? That's what they used to use for modified stuff. And they were getting 3 horsepower per cubic inch. Now the engines were only 290 cubes. That was the big deal. Was a D-stroke small block Chevy that you're using the factory steel crank and turning it down. And the turbocharged thing, the unlimited, you guys are running an unlimited ET class, and the money's just going to run away with it, and you can't compete. Now you can build a turbocharged junk 5.3 LS and run really, really fast. Sure. You know, go get your 5.3 LS naturally aspirated motor and try to run really fast.
And you know what, Dallas? Let's just throw the car away and put the engine in a dragster. Because after all, why would you have a car when you get? But wait a minute, I want to
that's
do
exactly
this
how
with
it
a
is.
car. It's the same thing.
Yeah.
We all choose our challenges. Most of the old parts mentioned something interesting. He says Billy Glidden was the epitome of a do-it-yourself guy, and he was scrutinized, but just because he worked 60 to 80 hours a week. You know who the modern Glidden family is? It's the Nelsons. They are the modern-day Glidden family. Those people, no one will outwork them. And it's really something to see what they're actually using in their cars. Hard work is the biggest secret to their success, like the Gliddens.
And I always liked the thinking around the problem thing. That was one of the things I really enjoyed too. Was, man, I had no idea how much Bob Glidden cut down those factory tunnel rams to run in pro stock until Drag Boss started doing videos on them, and you had a side-by-side comparison of your Edelbrock tunnel ram for a Cleveland next to Bob Glidden's Cleveland tunnel ram, and it sat 2 inches shorter, 3 inches wider. The plenum was a half inch, thicker on either side. It was just so interesting.
Hey, by the way, Mark Shaw said he was in the No Name 500 for the first No Name Nationals, and he said in here he's in a bad car wreck and got sidetracked for a while. But now he's working on his build again. Well, man, we'd love to meet you in person. So, yeah, man, we were looking forward to seeing what you do. We'd love to meet you in person, and welcome back. We haven't seen you in a while. Glad you're on the mend.
Oh, yeah. That's terrible. Yeah, I didn't even know anything about it. We probably could have wrangled up some, GoFundMe to put some flowers in your hotel or in your hospital room during that time. Had anybody known?
Well, we're glad you're here tonight.
Yeah, I'm glad you made it back. I mean, you didn't really miss much, man. Your life was more important. So, let's see. Oh, Hippie Miller saying that tires fixed the death wobble from last week. Excellent. That's good. That's good to hear. Yeah, so mostly old parts. Ron is saying that Bob Glidden impressed the hell out of me when he and Ford split ways, and he still dominated with a small block Mopar.
Yeah, absolutely.
That just shows you how much of it was Bob Glidden, right? It really wasn't the engine, it wasn't the car, it was Bob Glidden himself. So
Bob Glidden won a championship with a Cleveland Fairmont in 78, a small block Mopar Aero in 79, went back to Ford for 80, and then had to switch over to the big block, I think in 82. So look how many times he had to completely flip his entire program on end and still continued dominance. Was amazing.
Yeah, because he went from the Aero. Didn't he go from the Aero to the most winningest car ever, which was that Fairmont?
He had the Fairmont, and then he went to that Plymouth, and then I believe he went back for a season.
Okay, all right.
Never mind. If he had stayed with Plymouth, I actually saw something that he was supposed to have a Volare for 1980. And then the deal didn't work out with Chrysler, so he went back to Ford. But he was going to be in an F body.
Let's see. Miss Getchy says this is one of your best shows. So, oh well, thanks.
It's Wyatt.
It is Wyatt.
That's it.
He's probably sitting back there just keeping us. Well, I don't know. He's just probably bored.
And Mark Shaw, DV does do live streams occasionally. He always does them with Andy. I did one with him not long ago. You see him occasionally, every few weeks. Usually on a Saturday or something. If I'm down, it'll be on a Friday.
Yeah, so Fabrice Mod Repeat says Bob's work ethic was just plain incredible, but keep in mind it wasn't just him, it was the whole family, and that makes a
Yes.
huge difference. And it does. And I think, in all honesty, had Bob not been married to Etta and had the boys, he probably would have still dominated.
Yep.
That's how driven that dude was. I really think that, they just made it easier for him to do it. I think that's really what it was. But that dude was, gosh, he was, I remember my old man just used to revere that guy. He is the working man's hero right there. Like, okay.
Bob
And then
Clinton had no hobbies. He didn't have a personal hot rod either. So like Ford would provide him with these big Lincolns and stuff. That's what he drove for everyday drivers. But he didn't have a personal hot rod either. All that guy ever did, every waking minute, was work on his race programs. All he ever did. Gave his entire life to it.
Well, there's a reason why they call him the GOAT.
Yeah, I mean, he gave his whole life to it.
Well, it's just like Michael Jordan in basketball. I mean, he was literally devoted his entire lifetime to that program, his whole life. And, it showed.
Hippie Miller. DV is his own thing. He's his own entity. We're very fortunate to have him. But he usually has Andy on for a live. He's had me on there too. And it works good that way. And but everything you can learn from DV is worth it.
Yeah, he's actually he's getting up there now. And
his knowledge is up here though. So sometimes it does make it a little tough to follow, but it's worth it. It's worthwhile.
Let's see here. Levi's Backyard Performance. That's my problem. I'm the only mechanic and fabricator for my car. My girlfriend definitely is helpful, but I don't have much support as far as physical help. And that's kind of to be expected. I mean, you don't want your girlfriend out there welding crap, sticking her fingers in the grinder by accident, and smashing her toes. That's not nice to come home to. But, there is no real problem unless you're actually expecting more from yourself than what you're delivering. I think you need to take the time because you found a girl that likes you to support you doing the hobby that you like, right? That's cool. You need to foster that relationship big time. And if I was you, I'd be flipping the script. I'd be spending 80 hours a week working on her and, 20 hours a week working on this race car.
Don't overlook 9 pluses for 1 minus.
Yeah. That's, yep.
Tall Garage. We've all got shop injuries. Why would you be any exception?
You've never done that?
I mean, why would you wind up getting your finger caught behind a loading deck on a truck? I mean, this stuff happens.
That's not true, though.
I've done it, but it's not like you're intentionally walking in the garage with your finger out like this, going up to the grinding wheel.
Yeah, and nobody would do that. Who would do that? That's weird.
That is weird.
Not on purpose.
That's like the fastest way to die in a garage.
Let's see. Tall Garage says, I have a real bad case of imposter syndrome. I don't think I deserve anything I achieve. My friend, you need probably some therapy with. Especially at I'm like the first person to, I'm trying to be very humble about the things I do, but I'm also the first person when I do something that's people won't normally do or can't do, I'll pat myself on the back if I pull it off. I'm telling you right now, man, it's not a good relationship to have the girl in the garage when you're in there working. I grew up in the garages. It's not a good place for the women. It's not.
Ken, going back to the deserving thing. You talk about deserving. Dave Ramsey, whenever a caller asks him how you're doing, he says, better than I deserve. And what he means by that is he might not deserve all the blessings he has, but he'll take them. But he admits he's doing even better than he deserves. So when something good happens to you, take it. Be happy.
So Fab Race Mod Repeat here is going to print this on a t-shirt tomorrow. Your projects are only limited by inspiration, imagination, and perspiration. Remember, you're doing it to have fun. Follow your path and enjoy the process. So
that's it. Enjoy the journey.
Let's see.
See, Danny Boyd puts his finger in the bandsaw. And if there was anybody in here who I would expect to have done that, it would be Danny Boyd.
No, I don't think Colleen's going to get angry at all. What I'm getting at is when you are a novice to a garage, right? You're going to make stupid mistakes and you're going to pay for them, right? First time you ever use a welder, okay? Did you ever think about the splatter getting on your arm or your leg? Has it happened? Have you ever caught a pair of pants on fire? That kind of stuff happens all the time, every day, in every shop across the country. It would be no different than when you take somebody who's not afflicted with the automotive industry disease and throw them in a shop because she wants to be around you, right? And then she's going to stick her finger in the grinder. She's going to stick her finger in the bandsaw. Colleen has grown up around this for quite a while. I doubt she sticks her finger in the grinder anymore or the bandsaw. She probably learned the hard way a long time ago. But
Colleen is wired different anyway. I mean, she's you don't have to coax her to do anything in the shop. Don says, I'm loving my build journey. Don is old enough to have the wisdom to figure out that it's about the journey. And so he's enjoying the journey instead of just saying, I wish I was at a destination. He gets it. Don gets it. That's why he's always having a good time.
38 POS Racing said that's going to have to be a triple XT just to fit all that on there.
Yeah, Fab Race Modern Pizza says, haven't we all stuck our finger in something sharp at the shop? I had a cut that went all the way down the length of that finger last week, and I still don't know how I did it. I did it somehow putting bearings in, and every time I bend my finger, it would hurt. I'm like, I don't even know where that happened.
I did something super dumb one day. I had a whole 8.8 Ford. It's sitting on 2 jack stands, pumpkin down. And I was setting the backlash on it. And I had my hand on the bottom so I could feel the pinion, right? And I knocked that sucker off the jack stands and it fell, all that weight fell directly on my finger.
Oh.
The bone came out the side. Oh. And I like literally pulled my finger out and I was like, oh man. And my buddy, his wife was a nurse. She looked at that and there was this gray nugget sticking out the side of my finger. And she was just like, just fell right out, right? And I'm like, dang it, I didn't plan for that at all. But I just can't picture my significant other or person that I'm in a relationship with. I'd feel so bad for them. I don't know what I would do. Then I'd tell them get back to work. I'm kidding.
Levi, if that's true, there's something weird and wrong with you.
No, man. Haven't you ever watched Rocky? Women weaken legs. That's like the truth. She's going to take your focus and attention off of what you're doing.
I mean, she's outworking you. Michael Schmidt says, when you and Shane moved to Tennessee, what types of racing were you surprised to find that California didn't have? It's a weird question. That's kind of different, though.
Yeah, and I'm not from California, so I just went there for the Navy, and so I grew up in Illinois, where there was no limit on the types of racing. I mean, we literally had all of it: tractor pulling. Dude, there's just so much crap. The neat thing that I have seen in California that I still don't see anywhere else is the figure 8 racing, but I'm sure that happens somewhere else.
Well, in the figure 8, I've seen that other places. You got to have a track that'll facilitate it.
Yeah, probably. And that's probably the big one.
Yeah.
But the things that were going on in the Midwest that are really unique to the Midwest, there used to be this thing called the Gambler 500, whereas you drive these off-road vehicles on these off-road trails for 500 miles. I think that's it. I mean, that's the only thing I can think of.
They have the Gambler 500 here.
Do they? Is it? I thought I had one away.
Well, I don't know. At least they did a couple of years ago. And Ron is saying Beach Bend has figure 8.
Oh, do they really?
Yeah, figure 8 with trailers. Yeah, that's a demolition derby in slow motion. Figure 8 with trailers.
Yeah. Let's see. Beach Bend Raceway has figure 8. Okay, well, I haven't been out there to check anything out then, I guess. Buick Smith is saying blacksmithing for 42 years now, and 4 days ago I showed a student that you shouldn't pick up black metal in the shop the hard way.
Yeah.
1 1/4 inch by 3 inch white marks on my left hand.
Oh, man.
Man, it's making me cringe just thinking about it. And just imagine how it would sound. Because what's weird about it is those kind of burns like that, they don't hurt right away. You'll hear it first.
Yep.
You hear it sizzle, and realize that that's your hand or your finger or your body appendage. Because if it's black hot like that, golly, man, that's 3rd degree instantaneous. So 38 POS Racing says, Dallas, I figure 8 raced for about 20 years here in the country fair, still have the car. Gosh, it takes some brass balls to do that.
Still have the same car? Same? And what kind of car is it? Please tell us more, Racer Ray.
And I think I've said this before on the live. When I just graduated high school, I had some buddies in Illinois, and we used to get together every Payday Friday, and we had a race called Payday Friday. And you would literally go buy a car for some junk turd mobile, right? $50, $100, whatever. And you'd show up at Payday Friday, and everybody would just slap down like $100. And then we would go running through the waterways and ditches in between fields in Illinois, because every road is a mile by a mile, but you'll have these drainage waterways that run through the fields to drain it all off to the tiling that's in the fields or the waterways. Hey, stop.
Okay.
And the crazy part about it was there was no rules. It was like put a seatbelt on and a helmet, and so that's if you had a helmet. And man, we would wide open these suckers until they just didn't run anymore. The last car running was the winner. And then you'd part it out, and you help your buddies part it out until the next Payday Friday, which would be like a month from now, and you'd do it again. And it was so much fun. And there was literally I'm telling you, if we would have had YouTube and with the hero cameras and all that stuff back then, oh, dude, I would have been freaking YouTube famous 30 years ago. Easy.
38 POS Racing did that with an 81 Tornado. That's front wheel drive, isn't it? TH425 front wheel drive.
Oh, 81. Yeah, 81 would have been.
Man,
yeah.
Dude.
I don't know if it would have been a 425 at 81. It probably was, actually.
Razor Ray is an impressive guy. Really, he is. The stuff he does.
Michael Schmitz is Barrows on these tech shows. He pops in every now and then. Is he still doing videos? I don't know.
He does videos.
Does
Barrows is usually live every Sunday too, I believe, or every Saturday. He's live every weekend.
I don't know about it. 81 wouldn't have not have been a 455 Oldsmobile. All those went away.
What he has in it.
But it would have been like 350 Oldsmobile or 307 Oldsmobile. I don't know what it would have been right around that time frame. But
I really think it's cool, those GMC motorhomes that had the 455 with the TH425 front wheel drive with Tornado. That's the coolest motorhome setup ever. Dude,
and the sad part is like they made all kinds of neat stuff for those, right? There used to be an ad for camping where they had a Tornado and they had the back tires off the Tornado, and it had just the sway bars, like your receiver hitch with the weight distribution hitch, holding the whole car up with the camper behind it, because it's just pulling with the front wheels. It was such a freaking cool ad, man. But all right, so I hate to do this, but it's now 2 hours, guys. This went by so fast.
It flew, didn't it?
It did. And I think, it was the good topics, getting me fired up about, Dynacorn bodies and the economy and fake emission stuff and
Fun stuff.
whatever. Yeah. So it just flew by. But tonight was a pretty good show. We went pretty quick. I'm sorry that we're gonna have to stop because I literally have more life knocking on my door right here with Wyatt. We got a Nerf war planned immediately hereafter, so there's no doubt why he had his Nerf gun in here.
And
So,
I will see you guys if you want to come to my channel, 8 Eastern, 7 Central on Friday. It's going to be 90 days to go till 3rd annual No Name Nationals. We're going to check in on our No Name 500 guys that are taking the Shorts Challenge. And I'll see you guys there 2 days from now.
yeah. So we're out of here.
We out.
See you guys next Wednesday.